After learning about the action potential in myocardial cell, stages 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, now it's time for us to compare the skeletal muscle to the cardiac muscle. Do you remember this slide from the skeletal muscle? Remember, action potential is going to happen in skeletal muscle, which is pretty short, and after that, you're going to have one twitch, a contraction and relaxation. And then we mentioned in the case of a skeletal muscle, this is not going to be very helpful because you're going to relax muscle very quickly. To continue contraction, we have to send multiple action potential. As a result, you're going to create a summation. More actin myosin will be recruited, and as a result, the muscle is going to be in a continuous contraction we call tetanus. The question is, do you want to have tetanus in the heart? Do you want your heart to go through contraction and stays in contraction? Obviously not. We want heart create only a twitch. Contraction, relaxation. Contraction, relaxation. We don't want your heart to go to tetanus. How are we going to prevent that? Well, the answer is, in the case of a skeletal muscle, as you can see, the duration of the action potential is pretty lengthy. This green one shows the action potential that we just went through. And that duration of this action potential, this green one, is almost as long as a cardiac cycle. In the cardiac cycle, one contraction, one relaxation is going to last around 300 milliseconds. And the action potential is going to last around 250 milliseconds. If you want to create a second action potential, you have to wait until the first one is over. And by the time the first one is over, your muscle, your cardiac muscle, is already in relaxation. So therefore, in the case of skeletal muscle, the action potential is very short, and that allows us to create multiple action potential before the cells goes to relaxation. You see that? This part of the curve represents relaxation. So we have time to create multiple action potential. As a result, we create summation. In the case of cardiac, as you can see, the action potential is very lengthy. As a result, by the time the refractory period is over, the muscle is already in relaxation. That is going to guarantee that your heart is not going to go to tetanus. And as a last note here, if by any means I block potassium channel, remember potassium channel will be on stage 1, 2, and stage 3. If I block potassium channel, then my refractory period is going to be even longer. In other words, you can prolong your refractory period by blocking potassium channel. This picture shows that if you want to send the second action potential, almost cardiac muscle is in full relaxation, so the chance for tetanus will be 0. Let's go back to this slide. We said SA node is going to create action potential, and this action potential is going to come to cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is going to show action potential. As a result, is going to go to contraction. Now, let's take a look at the action potential in SA node. Not in the regular cardiac muscle, but in the special cells of the heart, and that is SA node, or AV node for that reason. This diagram shows action potential inside the SA node, or again for AV node. As soon as the cell is going to reach the threshold, which is right here, the calcium channel is going to open, and calcium is going to rush inside the cell. When the calcium comes in, inside the cell becomes positive, and it's going to move toward positive 20. Calcium channel is going to close, and then potassium channel is going to open. When potassium channel is open, potassium is going to leave the cell. As a result, inside the cell become negative, and curve is going to come back down. This is called stage 0. This is called stage 3. Because stage 1 and 2 that you saw in the cardiac muscle is missing. So there is no stage 1 and there is no stage 2. Therefore, we call this one stage 0 and we call this one stage 3. Here's the beauty of this SA node. As soon as potassium leaves and the membrane potential is going to come toward negative, as soon as it's going to reach around minus 60, something magical happens. And that is, all of a sudden, the sodium channel is going to open. Remember, channels open due to depolarization. This channel opens due to repolarization. This sodium channel here is going to open when the cell is repolarizing. That is really funny. That's why they call it a funny channel. We never heard such a thing. We always talked about when you depolarize, you open a channel. But this one we say, when you repolarize it, you open a channel. That's why we call this one funny channels. But you cannot call a channel funny because then nobody is going to take you seriously. That's why they changed the term instead of calling it funny channels, they called it HCN. HCN, or funny channels. Remember, as soon as potassium leaves the cell and inside the cell is going to reach to -60, then sodium channel is going to open. And that sodium channel is going to open, sodium is going to come inside the cell and bring this membrane potential to -40. As soon as we get to -40 is a threshold, calcium channel is open, and then calcium is going to close, potassium channel is going to open, potassium is going to leave the cell, and as soon as we get to the -60, again the sodium channel is open, and this cycle is going to go on and on. As you can see, that's the reason that cell has automaticity. So how many times this is going to go through? 60 to 100 times. Every time this is going to happen, you create one action potential, and it's going to go through this myocardial cell. Then myocardial cell is going to show action potential, and as a result, you will see in a minute that the heart is going to contract. So this guy is going to create impulse from scratch because it has funny channels. Then the impulse is going to come to the regular muscle cell. Regular cardiac cell is going to show action potential, release calcium, and cause contraction. A couple of points. This calcium channel is called T-type. It's different than L-type that you saw in the regular cardiac muscle. The second note probably you have to pay attention is why we call these funny channels HCN. Because this channel opens due to hyperpolarization. So H stands for hyperpolarization, and CN because you also can open these funny channels by sympathetic stimulation. And remember, sympathetic is going to use cyclic AMP, and cyclic AMP is a nucleotide. So therefore CN stands for cyclic nucleotide. So there are two things can open this channel. One is hyperpolarization, and the other one is cyclic AMP, which is a cyclic nucleotide, and as a result we call it HCN channel. Now let's take a look at the effect of sympathetic and parasympathetic on the SA node, on the heart rate. This is normal action potential in the pacemaker of the heart. Stage 4, stage 0, stage 3, stage 4, stage 0, stage 3, and so on and so forth. If you bring sympathetic to the SA node, sympathetic is going to open these funny channels faster. So the effect of sympathetic would be opening the funny channels faster. As you can see, stage 4 is going to last shorter, therefore you're going to have more action potential. As you can see here, we have only 2 action potential, here we have 3. So the effect of sympathetic on the SA node would be making this stage 4 shorter. Here is the slide that you have seen before. Remember, when norepinephrine or epinephrine sits on the receptor, the G protein, which is called GS protein, is going to break up. Alpha unit is going to activate adenylyl cyclase, or it's called adenylate cyclase. This enzyme is going to break down ATP to cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP is going to activate protein kinase, and protein kinase here is going to open this channel. This channel is called HCN channel. That's why we call it CN, because cyclic AMP is a cyclic nucleotide that is responsible for opening the channel. And as a result, sodium is going to come inside the cell. So sympathetic is going to increase your heart rate by making sure HCN is going to open faster and longer. So this phase 4 is going to be shorter because you open the HCN channel faster. How about the effect of parasympathetic? As you can see, parasympathetic is going to make this stage 4 much longer. So how does parasympathetic work? Parasympathetic is going to block cyclic AMP, so therefore phase 4 is going to be shorter, and also is going to open the potassium channel and allows potassium to get out. And as a result, your membrane potential become even more negative than -60. Let's take a look. Well, as soon as acetylcholine is going to sit on this receptor, this G protein is called GI protein, or also it's called GK protein. This GI protein, the first thing it's going to do, it can block the action of adenylyl cyclase. By blocking this one, you're not going to create cyclic AMP, so you cannot open this channel faster. That's the first event. The second thing that this G protein can do is going to go ahead and attach to the potassium channel and opens potassium channel. When you open potassium channel, potassium is going to leave cell, and inside the cell become more negative. As you can see, my resting membrane potential here, which was around -70 or -60, now is going to go to below -80. So my cell becomes more negative. So that means it's going to take longer for me to go to -40. As a result, you can see phase 4 is really, really long. The type of receptor for parasympathetic is called M2. Potassium channel is called KACH, potassium acetylcholine channel. When autonomic nervous system changes the heart rate, it's called chronotropic effect. Chronotropic, that means changing the heart rate. It can be positive or it can be negative. When the heart rate goes up, just in the case of sympathetic, we call it positive chronotropic. When parasympathetic works on the SA node and decrease the heart rate, we call it a negative chronotropic effect. But sympathetic and parasympathetic also can affect AV node by increasing conduction of the impulse or decreasing conduction of impulse. You can make this AV node to send impulse faster or to keep it longer. Remember, the job of AV node is holding the impulse for 0.1 to 0.2 seconds. Sympathetic is going to make this AV node to send impulse faster. Parasympathetic is going to tell the AV node to hold it longer. That is going to change the speed of conduction for AV node. Change of conduction velocity of the AV node is called dromotropic effect. Changing the heart rate is called chronotropic effect. Changing the conduction velocity is called dromotropic effect. Again, can be positive or negative. Sympathetic is going to make this AV node to let the impulse go faster, so it has a positive effect. Parasympathetic is going to hold the impulse in the AV node, so it has a negative effect. But what is the mechanism behind it? Well, the answer is sympathetic is going to increase the conductance of calcium in the stage 0, and as a result, the upstroke of this curve, or stage 0, happens much faster. Parasympathetic, however, is going to slow down this stage, is going to slow down the movement of calcium, and also is going to open up the KACH, the potassium channel at the stage 3, and as a result, potassium is going to leave the cell faster and extensively. As a result, inside the cell become much more negative, and therefore the AV node can hold it longer. And that is going to bring us now to excitation contraction coupling. When the action potential happens in the cardiac cell, how this cardiac cell is going to release calcium and cause contraction. SA node created action potential got to the myocardial cells, and now the question is how this myocardial cells is going to release calcium. This picture shows a myocardial cell. Here's inside the myocardial cell. This is the cell membrane of myocardial cell. Remember, we have T-tube, just similar to the skeletal muscle. Action potential is going to come through and is going to get inside the T-tube. This calcium channel is an L-type calcium channel. This is the one that you opened in the plateau phase of the cardiac action potential. I hope you remember that. We just mentioned in a stage 2, calcium is going to get inside the cell, and the type of calcium channel here is L-type. And this is the calcium channel or L-type. So as soon as the action potential is going to get here, this channel is going to open, and that is going to allow some calcium get from outside in. This calcium that comes from outside is called trigger calcium. And I told you this is really important calcium. Why? Because as soon as the calcium is going to come in, this calcium is going to stimulate sarcoplasmic reticulum to release more calcium. So this calcium is going to trigger to opening this calcium channel, which is called ryanodine channel, and you saw it in the case of skeletal muscle also, and now the calcium is going to get released. Skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle, as far as the process of contraction, they're similar. They have actin, we have troponin, tropomyosin, we have myosin, so it's exactly the same process that you saw in skeletal muscle. So the only difference here is how do you release calcium in the cardiac muscle versus skeletal muscle. Calcium is going to attach to troponin, tropomyosin is going to move away, and contraction is going to happen. This idea that calcium from outside is going to come in and is going to make you to release more calcium from sarcoplasmic reticulum is called calcium induces calcium release. To end this contraction, we have to take the calcium back. But where this calcium is coming from? Well, you have to take it back inside the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Therefore, we have a calcium pump at the wall of sarcoplasmic reticulum. This calcium comes from outside the cell also, so we have to pump this calcium out as well. To pump this calcium out, we have to use a co-transport, calcium and sodium. Calcium is going to go out, sodium is going to come in. 1 calcium versus 3 sodium. This is a secondary pump. The function of this pump depends on the sodium-potassium pump. Remember sodium-potassium pump? Sodium-potassium pump is going to take the sodium out and bring potassium in. As a result, sodium is outside the cell. Sodium is going to come to this guy and says, can you let me in? This pump is going to say, sure, you can come in, but I have to take calcium out. So as a result, sodium is going to come in and calcium is going to get out. As soon as sodium is going to come in, sodium is going to be taken by this ATP and is going to go out. So as you can see, sodium is going to come in, is going to go out, come in, is going to go out. And every cycle, 1 calcium is going to get out. If I block this pump, as a result, this sodium doesn't want to come in anymore. As a result, calcium doesn't want to leave anymore. As a result, calcium is going to stay inside the cell more. As a result, the contraction is going to continue. People who have a heart failure, that means their heart cannot contract strongly. So what we're going to do, we have to give them a drug that blocks this pump, the sodium-potassium pump. As a result, if you block this pump, then the calcium is not going to get out, calcium is going to stay, and contraction is going to continue. There are a couple of things that I think is important we have to mention here. One is, we all know the more calcium you release, the more actin myosin you can recruit, and you can create stronger contraction. But how can we change the amount of calcium we're releasing? There are 2 ways. One is, based on how much calcium is going to go through this L-type channel, the more calcium comes in, the more calcium is going to get released from sarcoplasmic reticulum. So if you want to release more calcium, you have to make sure you have a stronger stimulation. And the second is, the more this calcium pump works, the more calcium is going to get stored here instead of being dumped outside. And the more calcium is going to get stored here, that means next round you can release more calcium. Let me repeat one more time. If this pump works really fast and really strong, majority of this calcium is going to get inside the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Less is going to go outside the cell. That means now we have more calcium inside the sarcoplasmic reticulum. In the next round, you're going to release more calcium. So therefore, I would say the strength of contraction depends on how much calcium you release. And the release of calcium depends on how much calcium is going to go through this L-type and how much calcium you have inside the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The amount of calcium in the sarcoplasmic reticulum depends on the activity of this calcium pump. This flow chart is going to summarize what we talked about, and you can see it yourself. And finally, as a last note, we are going to talk about the effect of sympathetic and parasympathetic in heart contractility. When norepinephrine is going to sit on this receptor, which is beta-1 receptor, by the way, we said it's going to break down G protein, and finally it's going to create protein kinase. We said this active protein kinase can increase the heart rate by opening HCN channel. But besides that, how does this protein kinase is going to increase heart contractility? Well, the answer is this protein kinase can do 2 things. Protein kinase is going to come and make this L-type calcium channel open longer, and as a result, more calcium is going to come in. More calcium comes in, more calcium is going to get released from sarcoplasmic reticulum. That means more contraction. So protein kinase A is going to open this L-type channel and allows more calcium in. And 2 is going to activate this calcium pump. There's a protein here, it's called phospholambon, and this phospholambon, when it's phosphorylated by protein kinase A, is going to activate this calcium ATPase. And by activating this calcium ATPase, we said more calcium is going to accumulate here, so next round you have more calcium to release. On the other hand, parasympathetic can only affect the heart contractility on the atrium, not ventricle. So you have to realize that sympathetic is going to increase the heart rate at the SA node, is going to increase conduction at AV node, is going to make your ventricular muscle to contract and pump more blood out. Parasympathetic can slow down your SA node, can slow down your AV node, but as far as the contractility goes, only affects the atrium, not a ventricle. Parasympathetic has no effect on contraction of the ventricle, only affect the atrium. And that is going to bring us to the end of this discussion.